Welcome to the Building Performance Podcast, where we answer your questions about high-performance building and home improvements. I am here with my co-host and life partner, Grace.
Hi, guys. I'm Grace Lunsford.
We are going to be responding to people who have seen Home Diagnosis, which is our television program, on public television stations across the country, and who have their own questions about their own homes or about their homes that belong to their family. And so, first of all, let's just say we're sorry that this has been a couple months coming. We're building a house. I'm looking at it out the window of our 200 square foot tiny house where we live.
We're filming season 2.
We shot 4 episodes of season 2 of the show.
We have a 3.5 and a 1.5-year-old.
We're trying to figure out where they're going to school and. So anyway, that's our life. This podcast.
Maybe you relate. Hopefully you're laughing inside.
Yeah. So anyway, Grace and I are married. We are work together, and so this is our spare time, which we don't really get much of. So let's go ahead and dive in. First question from a viewer.
Yeah. Okay, so our first question comes from member station WNYE, and Chris has written in. Chris says, my husband and I put a room addition on our house back in the 80s. The other day, I noticed that the room addition seems to be moving away from the rest of the house. We have had problems before with tile that we put over the seam where the house abuts the addition, but now the crack is widening and the molding is tearing apart from where the room joins. Not sure what to do, but cry, laugh out loud. I can't imagine it'll be cheap to fix, but I'm not sure where to turn.
Laughing and crying. That's a good place to start. So that's homeownership, right?
Right.
So, yes, this happens. The first thing that you will notice if you start investigating performance is that additions aren't always very well attached to the house to begin with when we're looking at invisible stuff like air leakage. Mm-hmm. So lots of additions that I've tested have shown that there's a big air leakage seam where they just, pasted the addition onto the house. But this is a whole other problem that points directly to why your builders and home improvement contractors are not paying attention to invisible stuff. Is because this idea that a house could literally tear itself apart is much, much scarier. Any invisible physics and chemistry that's going on really doesn't matter when it comes to a house that is falling apart. So, yes, what you need to do is consult with a structural engineer or a geotechnical engineer if you have soil problems, like if potentially water is eroding underneath your foundation. There's all kinds of things that can go into this, but dirt and the foundation of your house are very, very serious things to think about.
Absolutely, and that's where Chris should probably start.
And so you should just make sure that everybody understands that this is why you don't ask for discounts and you don't shop for the lowest bidder. Because if you do, this is what might happen to you. This company that did the addition for this caller probably is not around anymore.
Probably, but at the same time, I'm going to play devil's advocate right here. It could have been a very expensive addition. That could have been a very expensive foundation too. And the work still could have been done not correctly.
Or mitigating circumstances like rain or flood or an underground spring that you didn't know about.
Right.
Could, an underground sewer that the city buried there that you didn't know about that's actually still in use. Any of these things could happen. So what you really need to do is what we call forensic investigation.
Absolutely.
And just finding out what is going on. Because if it continues, then obviously that's going to take your house apart. Anyway, that's a long way to say this is a much bigger picture than just performance at this point.
Right, absolutely. But at the same time, the other thing to really keep in mind is as this is happening, what is it doing to the rest of the house? Because the house is a system, and if you are seeing these major air leakages over here, it's going to be pulling from other places.
Absolutely.
Okay, our next question, and thank you, Chris, for writing in, it comes from UNCTV. And Julie writes, I live in North Carolina where it's wet and rainy and mildewy. I moved into my home 4 years ago, and the home is now 15 years old. It's fairly new. And there's always been a mildewy odor permeating up through the floor, and especially the return vents and vents in the floor. I thought it was an HVAC problem, but each inspection determined I needed an encapsulation of the crawlspace. So I eventually paid a lot of money to have it done. In the process, the floor insulation of the crawlspace was removed. So now I basically have a hole under the house, encapsulated with plastic, and insulation installed along the walls of the crawl space, but no insulation under the floor space. It seems colder in the home in the winter, and I need the thermostat up higher. I've noticed I've been told by different companies who do insulation that I need insulation under the floor. And some say I don't need insulation under the floor because it is encapsulated with a dehumidifier and with air circulation. It provides the insulation. Provides is in quote, who is right?
Awesome. So yes, this is why our show exists, is because it's confusing. So first thing that I'll say is that Grace and I have experience with crawl spaces. We are building our own crawl space outside this tiny house.
Mm-hmm. We've built 2 crawl spaces in this one house.
Yes, and they're separated for reasons that you'll see in the show. But essentially, or you can follow us on YouTube, and if you haven't done that already, please do. It's called the Home Performance Channel. Anyway, this crawl space issue is a big one. First of all, mildew. If you're smelling it, then obviously it's there, and it's a moisture issue. So moisture can get to be a problem through a bunch of different ways. Liquid water could be coming into your house from below or from above, like rain. Your gutter system could be not working properly, and it could be draining back into the house. It could also be because you've got a humidity issue that is forming condensation on cool surfaces. That's typically what you're going to have in the case of crawl spaces. So first thing you should do is go to our home diagnosis website, which is homediagnosis.tv, and download the Genius booklet or the Proof is Possible booklet. That's a 24-page illustrated thing that Grace and I have put together.
Every homeowner should absolutely do this. And if you download that magazine and then you start geeking out, go ahead and become a Crash Course member. We have a Crash Course specifically for homeowners. This will really help you dive into understanding your home.
Yeah, because being able to talk and think your way through your own issues and then ask for specific things instead of saying, hey, what could be wrong here? If you're not testing, first of all, you're not really sure what's going on. So that's the thing that I would say in this case. Encapsulation. The word encapsulation means different things to different contractors. So if you hire a company that does crawl space encapsulations all day long, they could be doing a number of different things. There's not one definition for it. My definition and Grace's definition would be if you have a situation where the walls of the crawl space are completely airtight, and when I say completely, I mean substantially, right? They're made out of concrete. It's not that hard generally to try and air seal them. And if they're not made out of concrete and they're wood, then it should be relatively simple to do that as well, because there's all kinds of materials out there for that. You could use all kinds of different things to do that. You could use tapes and sealants. You could use spray foam insulation if you wanted to. All kinds of different things can do this for you. Then you insulate those walls, and you take the insulation out of the floor. Yes, that was correct to do. You should not ever have insulation in 2 places, against outside and against the house, because what happens at that point is not an efficiency byproduct. The problem is that you can't predict what temperature and humidity level is going to be in the crawl space. If you've connected it either with the house or with outside, then you can predict that. But if you put insulation in both places, that's always bad. So don't ever do that.
One illustration I really love about this is the 100% inside your home or 100% outside your home. It's just like your body. You want your clothes 100% on the outside of your body.
And
you're
your
not going to
on the inside.
Yeah, put a little bit of the sweater in your mouth or something like that. That's just not going to work.
Some teenagers have been known to do that. But in this case, the only thing that you have missing in this description is the blower door test with zonal pressure testing on the crawl space. I didn't hear any mention of the test. If they did not test, then you have no guarantee that the airtightness was taken care of, in which case adding insulation to the walls actually doesn't do anything because air moves through insulation. You can say that in your head over and over again. Air moves through insulation. You need to air seal first.
Insulation. Let's
Exactly.
all say it together.
So just because there's insulation does not mean that it's doing anything. So that would be the thing that I would recommend at this point, is to get it tested, find out what kind of a job this encapsulation company did.
And one quick test that you can do yourself, especially as we're getting into fall and winter, is you can put a thermometer down there that you can start tracking the temperature of the crawl space to see if really that's the problem.
Yeah, in the wintertime, you'll find that it gets a lot colder because air is coming in. In the summertime, the crawl space would be the coolest place in the entire house because your air conditioning ducts that are down there are probably leaking. So that's the most comfortable room in the house, aside from the humidity problem that's probably down there. So yes, that is an issue that you should definitely have taken care of. If there is mildew coming up into the air, there's all kinds of other things coming up into the air from that soil or the wetness or whatever it is going down there. So also, humidity is a way to really activate all the home chem elements, the chemical molecules and the particles and the creatures that are living on the surfaces all get activated into the air, and now you can breathe them. So this is how you can kind of develop some respiratory issues. So we'd say definitely take care of that.
Absolutely. And Julie, one other thing to just, again, get those thermostats out, make sure you are data logging, because there's this other weird psychology thing that can happen when you do a major improvement in your home. You can have false expectations sometimes, and then nothing will have changed, but you can feel different. And sometimes you have to recalibrate yourself. So anyhow, data, information is important. It will help you. It will set you free. And we're going to move on to the next question from another UNC TV viewer. This is Patricia. I am so aware of toxins. When I had a design business, I had formaldehyde poisoning. I have been very careful ever since. I have remodeled a home from 1952. I have air purifiers installed into my new HVAC system, but I feel something is not quite correct. Who do I call for an inspection? I live in North Carolina. I've been widowed for 2 years, and I have been taken advantage of by several workmen who were dishonest. It leaves me very skeptical. I've watched your show for the first time today, and I was so fascinated. Thank you, Patricia. And also, going into psychology again, right? Let's talk to the contractors real quick.
So contracting is hard. That's the first thing you should understand. It's like being a doctor, right? It's gross. People are going into, like what we were just talking about, crawl spaces or attics. There's
weather.
It's just not very nice. And horrible things could happen. First of all, to you personally, it's a very dangerous job. And also, your liability is through the roof because not only might you go to court or get, sued by somebody, but also you'd have people angry at you. Like you live there and your neighbors hate your guts. So there's all kinds of stuff to say. Be nice to contractors and try and empathize with them that this is hard. And all the stuff we're talking about, just like people who watch our show for the first time and they learn about it, the building industry is also doing the same thing. They're watching this, or they're hearing a lecture by somebody on building science or something else, and they're saying, whoa, I've never thought about it that way before.
Which is crazy because it's been around for as long as we've been alive. But the science is just starting to get out there. This is the very first TV show talking about it. I mean, how many home shows have you seen in the last 20 years? And none of them are talking about the home performance aspects of it.
Invisible chemistry and physics. So formaldehyde. So one dead giveaway that somebody is trying to hide a chemical like formaldehyde in their product is they'll say automatically, immediately, well, formaldehyde is a key ingredient in all wood. Like trees have formaldehyde in them. That is true. What we are really talking about is added formaldehyde. If a company does not add formaldehyde to their products, that's the first thing they'll say is, we don't add any formaldehyde to our products, like in the glues, for example. A company that's trying to hide it will point to the trees automatically having formaldehyde in them, which I think is kind of a creepy and sneaky way to go about it. So anyway, that's just a little clue for the listeners. But also, air purification is a thing. So there's 3 rules according to Home Chem. This is from Dr. Rich Corsi in the Home Chem Experiment. You'll hear more from him in season 2 of Home Diagnosis, we hope. And also you can see a huge interview with him on the Home Chem playlist at the Home Performance YouTube channel. The 3 rules are, number 1, don't bring bad stuff home with you.
Don't bring bad stuff home with you. What you bring into your home is what you breathe in your home.
Yeah, and that takes educating yourself. There's no other way to go about it because there is no regulation in place around helping you to breathe good stuff. Number 2 is keep it dry in your house. And that goes back to the crawl space issue that we were talking about before. So if there is formaldehyde in the house, a lot of it probably, and we're not chemists, but we've hung out with chemists, we've learned about this, is sticking to surfaces where it can be wiped off if you have a good cleaning protocol at your house. When the humidity goes up, it re-emits into the air. The third thing is ventilate. So when it does re-emit into the air, you take it out with fans that go to outside. That's with bath fans, with kitchen exhaust hoods, things like that. A whole house ventilation system. So when you have something like an air purifier, that's not any of those things. That allows us to bring whatever we want into our home, make it as wet as we want in our home, and then not have ventilation because we're basically filtering. We're just on recirc mode, like in your car. And so how exactly is this machine purifying the air is the question that you should ask.
Indeed. And some of the chemistry behind some of these air purifiers is messing with your indoor environment as well. And the indoor environment is something that really hasn't been studied. We're just now starting to see some data coming out of this very new but 10-year, $50 million research project with the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation called Indoor Environments Chemistry.
Chemistry of the indoor environment.
Thank you.
And what Grace means is it hasn't been studied like outdoor chemistry has been studied.
Exactly.
There is a field of study that's decades old about this, but they have not had the money, the resources, the time, the number of people to study indoors as we have had on outdoors. So you know the ozone level in your city today.
Right.
Because there are all kinds of regulations about that.
I think I got an alert on my phone this morning. It said, oh, be careful, ozone layer,
Right.
Is this...
And ozone
levels.
is one of the ways that you can purify air. You should never, ever, ever allow anyone you know to install anything that creates ozone in their house. It's not good 100% of the time. There are other ways to do it. Number one, there's a thing called HEPA filtration. This is a standard that means that you're going to filter out 99.97% of the particles that are getting smaller and smaller and smaller down to 0.3 microns, which is 300 nanometers in diameter. That's fairly small. It's not small enough that you're not going to breathe any bad particles in your house, but 99.97 of those big ones is good. There are filters that do a better job of that, and stay tuned to our home build for hopefully one that's going to be a lot better than HEPA, and you can see more about that at the YouTube channel. But another way to do it is there are companies that are making things that spray hydroxyl radical into the air or on surfaces. And the problem with those is that they leave chemical traces behind and they transform molecules that were in your house into something else. So you just manufactured chemicals. You don't know what that's doing. So cleaning out some particles or cleaning out some VOCs is one of the things that people get really scared about. Oh, no, I've got VOCs in my house. We emit VOCs. Everything makes VOCs. Anything you're smelling right now is probably a VOC. That's not a bad thing. That stands for volatile organic compound.
But it sounds so scary, Corbin.
It does. I know. The marketing departments at these places have really done a good job of making sure that you know some
we feel
actually
attacked.
Pretty irrelevant terms for how your air toxicity is turning out.
But all this chemistry that's happening, this slow burn that's happening inside your home, you really want to take care of it. You want to make sure that you're ventilating, you're moving fresh air in, you're moving stale air out. And again, remember, what you bring in your home is what you breathe in your home. And if you want to learn more about this, there is a bunch of research out there that's happening. But Hayward Score is a really great resource to look at.
It's a free assessment for your own home, so you could go to haywardscore.com and check that out.
I'll also mention sixclasses.org is a really interesting look at chemistry, frankly.
As far as not how to assess what you're bringing into your homes, that first rule.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, if you ventilate, if you follow those three rules, you pay attention to what you're bringing in. So formaldehyde, if you're sensitive to formaldehyde specifically, like this questioner is, then don't bring formaldehyde into your house. However you research that, particle board, plywood, stuff like that has formaldehyde in it. There are brands that do not have added formaldehyde, and so you could shop for those. But you pay attention to that, then you keep it dry in your house, generally with some kind of a dehumidification system, and then you ventilate, and you follow those three rules, you should have no problem. That's the ultimate answer. And if you think you're following all three of those rules and you have a problem, you're not actually following all three of those rules. And that is where testing can come in handy. Inspection is really nothing compared to testing. When it comes to invisible stuff, you got to test it.
Yeah. And there's 3 rules, and there is no one silver bullet.
True.
Okay, so thank you so much, Patricia. And we're going to go to our last question for this episode. This comes from WTTW, member station up in Illinois. Ed says, my wife and I converted an old cattle barn in 1982 where I grew up on my father's property. And we added an extended kitchen and 2 bedrooms. Lovely. It's now 2,000 square feet. In 1985, our electric bill keeps going up, and our electric company keeps giving suggestions. However, we went to 16 SEER gas pack, 18 inches of blown insulation, and nothing has worked. Help.
All right. Good one. Okay, so first thing.
Shall we define some of the stuff at the end of his question real quick?
Yeah, sure. So 16 SEER gas pack means that there's a package unit that's a furnace, that's a gas-fired furnace, which is paired with a 16 SEER air conditioner. That's an efficiency that's slightly more than what is required by law. 13 or 14 SEER is going to be required across the country. 16 SEER is 2 SEER better than that. It stands for Seasonal Energy Efficiency Ratio. It's basically a ratio of how much power you have to put into an air conditioner to get cooling out of it. Cooling and drying, that is. 16 SEER is like better than minimum, but our air conditioner that I'm looking at right now that's in the Tiny Lab is 33 SEER, for example. So twice as good on the efficiency side as that. So there's a whole big spectrum of this. I would say that wouldn't solve your problem all by itself, no matter what your house is like. But you didn't say anything about the ducts. We didn't say anything about the air tightness because we added insulation.
Added 18 inches of insulation.
Yeah, insulation is step number 2. And HVAC improvements are step number 3. Step number 1 in the recommendations always is air sealing.
And Ed, I'm so sorry if you're learning this later on,
Yes,
but also
everyone
step
does.
number 1, everybody's feeling this way. Step number 1 is the cheapest.
It's true.
It's the worst.
And just like insulation, it's cheap to go in. It doesn't require any energy to do its job. It just does its job automatically, and it only needs to be done one time, and it just lasts. So the first thing, though, that caught my attention in this description is that it was originally a cattle barn, and then it was converted into living space, and then it was added onto, and so in the first season of Home Diagnosis, we went to Philadelphia, and we visited a house that was an original production home from the 1980s. Nothing had ever been done to this house. Literally, it even had the same air conditioning and heating system in it. That is really cool because you can see, even if the builder didn't know what they were doing as far as the invisible dynamic control goes, you can at least see what their intent was. Let's just talk about the intent of a cattle barn builder. The intent is to make a place that's going to shelter cattle from rain and snow, that's going to ventilate out all the smells that come from cattle. It's going to keep it like relatively warm, but the cows don't need it to be.
There's probably going to be really big holes to get hay in there and cattle in there.
So the purpose, the intent of all of that stuff is completely different than what is going to be expected of a living space. So you've got like a Rubik's Cube, right? And every time you do something to your house, some surgery, you turn the Rubik's Cube, and it takes it further and further away from the original intent of what it is. So in Philadelphia, we had this house that had only been turned one time. It was built, and that's it. So you could see exactly what the builder intended. With this place, that was originally a cattle barn, or like in New York City, when we visited the oldest house in New York, it was originally a one-room house that was supposed to have no windows in it. Then it got windows. Then it turned into an office space. It had been turned so many times that nobody had any clue what was going on in there, dynamics-wise, anymore. That makes it harder. So taking a space that was meant for cattle and then converting it is a pretty hard thing to do. And if you're not testing all along the way there, then you have no clue how many turns you're giving this Rubik's Cube. And so how we get back to a place where that building works is the question. And that testing can get you there now where you're at. But basically you might need to have some slightly drastic things happen. Like you could, the easiest way to really affect the control over the invisible dynamics is to reskin the house, to totally fix the skin on the outside or the skin of the inside of the house. One or the other of those, depending on how the geometry of your house looks and all that stuff, might be easier or harder.
Let's also talk a little bit about energy efficiency here because you've gone to the utility company. This is something we hear from a lot of people. And utility companies often are like, oh, well, here, take an energy monitor and plug your
Here's
appliances
some
in it too.
CFLs.
Yeah, switch out for LED light bulbs. And I just wanted to state this national policy towards energy efficiency is not one that's bad by any means, but it's again a band-aid approach. It's
It's a bit
one
beside the
step.
point
Yes.
when we're talking about home diagnosis.
Exactly. And with home diagnosis, we're looking at a systems approach. So systems approach again. The rebates are lovely, but usually those are like one and done things. And it's not, again, going back to the systems.
It can never fix a system. Anybody who ever tries to sell you one thing that'll fix all of the problems in your house must be either naive or lying, because that is not physically possible.
And really, we're not trying to criminalize everybody. We just want people to be educated. I mean, honestly, that is one of the big reasons why home diagnosis is on PBS, because we can dive into the science, we can dive into the education, and we don't have to ask permission. In fact, that's what PBS wants to do. They want to help educate people. And that's also why we are able to do this podcast. So that's it for our questions today. And I hope that you guys have been enjoying season 1. We've got some great little interstitials that are going to be going out to programmers soon this fall. Season 2 is coming. It follows the build of our house, so be patient.
Yeah.
Builds take a while. But if you're really interested in the show and you'd like to see more behind the scenes and some of the adventures that we're going on, you can become a member and actively support the show through Patreon. This is a really cool new setup for creators like Corbin and I to get financial assistance without having to do a crowd fund every now and then or having to write 1,000,001 grants. We do still write for grants and we do still solicit sponsors, but as you might know, it's hard to raise money. So if you wanted to become a member, you can do so easily at $5 a month or all the way up to $100. And
less, you could write in a separate,
Or you could just come in once and say, you know what? Thanks for answering my question on the podcast. Here's $20. So anyhow, that's at patreon.com/homediagnosistv.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for listening, and tune in next time.